It's always time for some Texas football talk here at the Voice of College Football. We thank so much for everyone being here for our Wednesday call-in show. We'll take some calls a little bit later tonight, but we are going to focus on the Horns and Steve Sarkisian's first season. Of course, in Austin, we got Jeremy, we got Clint from Texas Football Talk. We also have Matthew Miller here to chop it up concerning UT. Gentlemen, how we doing tonight?
Hey, pretty good, man. We appreciate you having us on the show tonight. Mark, you know, it's always exciting when me and Jeremy can come on another show. You know, sometimes it's hosting is just it's a little bit more difficult than actually getting on here and answering questions is a little bit easier for us. But definitely excited to be on here tonight to kind of chop it up. Texas Longhorns, man, really excited.
So again, that's Clint who just got done speaking. We got Jeremy next to me and Matthew down in the other box. We'll talk it up concerning Texas football. And again, you guys are used to my call-in shows on Wednesday night. We'll take calls a little bit later here at the Voice of College Football, but we appreciate everybody being here. And you can certainly bring your comments and questions to the panel here. And I'll certainly have my 2 cents to add, but we'll serve it up for a lot of the Texas experts here. So we'll start first and foremost. So I got a little bit of this before we went live here from Jeremy, just in regards to, I always like to know the backstory of how you became a football fan, how you became a fan of that particular team. So Jeremy, let's start again with you. So everybody knows where you're coming from in regards to your Texas fandom.
Yeah. So this is kind of weird for me because Clint normally does our introduction and our bio for channels, but I hopped on a little bit earlier and I was giving Mark our rundown. So I'll play the role of play-by-play where I'm normally the color analyst. So back in 2019, myself and my brother were stationed in Korea. We're from Clint's retired Army. I'm still serving on active duty. And basically when you're overseas in the military, you're forced to watch what we call Armed Forces Network, AFN. You get like one college game a weekend. You get one pro football game a weekend, and you don't get ESPN, you don't get Fox Sports, so you're left with YouTube or internet content as your college game day, I would say. And so essentially, we fell in love with Fanatic Perspective, who's probably the largest. He is the largest. Stephen Nagati and his guy John Tran are the largest Texas football YouTube content creators. I would say they've been around 4 or 5 years and have done very well. And then Mark's program as well. It was Stephen Nagati and Fanatic Perspective, RJ Young, and Mark Rogers is where you got most of your content for 2019. So then we returned home. We're originally from Dallas, and I would say that me and Clint, when we were 6 and 4, our dad used to take us to TCU games against, whatever Southwest Conference opponent back then was visiting TCU. Well, we fell in love with the Longhorns because the Longhorns had the biggest visiting crowd in the stadium. And back then it was Peter Gardere. It was Lavelle Pinckney was their best player. And you just fell in love with the uniforms. And you saw them on the magazine covers in the grocery store. And it was Texas and it was burnt orange. And it was all about them. And so basically when we came back from overseas, I talked to my brother and I was like, hey, man, like we've been talking ball for 30, 40 years now to each other on the phone, in game, during the week, 3 or 4 times. I think we could do this. And so basically we started June of last year. Our first podcast was basically on YouTube with no video. It was us with our phones sitting on top of speakers. We published it. We had a perfect storm of a 7-3 season with a senior quarterback where we thought we could win the Big 12, and then a coaching firing, a coaching hiring, now realignment. That's kind of like driven a lot of viewers to our show, and we've grown really fast. We recently signed a podcast deal with the Pigskin Podcast Network. And so Texas Football Talk, you can find us just about anywhere, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, to name a few outlets. Did I cover it all, Clint?
Yeah, pretty good, man. I can tell you that when Jeremy called me in June about doing this channel, I was like, dude, you've lost your mind, man. We do this stuff like part-time, like really part-time. And a lot of our stuff is done, other than a couple of lives a week. We try to get everything done on the weekend and then kind of pre-po our shows throughout the week. So it gives us an opportunity because sometimes, we run against time clocks with work, you know what I'm saying? So we're pretty busy with work and then trying to do these things. But I thought Jeremy was crazy. I just couldn't see myself on YouTube doing a show, I think, first and foremost. But at the end of the day, we're very passionate about the Texas Longhorn program. I remember me and Jeremy, being at our grandparents' house on Thanksgiving way out in the country in Texas, in a small town, we're sitting around on Thanksgiving watching, the Texas Longhorns followed by, the Dallas Cowboys, whoever they were playing on Thanksgiving. So those are the things I remember, or listening to the radio. I've always loved Craig Way. And if I have an opportunity, I'll turn the TV down and listen to Craig Way, the voice of the Texas Longhorns, any day. And so those are the things that kind of create our fandom. And then believe it or not, in 2005, I was actually in Germany when Vince Young ran that touchdown in against USC. So I think it was somewhere around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in Germany watching a national title game. So it's kind of just followed us really through our military career. And I think this has made us close. I went maybe closer. Me and Jeremy have always been close. Obviously, we're brothers. But at the end of the day, we talk a lot. We see a lot now. We probably talk 10 times a day. So I think it's made us closer as brothers as well. So but yeah, that's just a little backstory around Texas football talk.
Matthew, what's your story?
Well, growing up in Ohio, I'm kind of a trader up here. So I'm kind of alone, Texas is pretty big up here. It's bigger than most people think. But we would always go over to my aunt's house, watch football. And it was the Rose Bowl game. It was Michigan versus Texas. And I just fell in love with the burnt orange and white. And ever since then, I've been a gigantic Texas football fan. I think the second worst day of my life was the day after losing to Alabama in the national championship game. That was probably one of the most depressing days I've had in my life. That's maybe sad to say, but it still bothers me. But for that week afterwards, it was pretty bad.
Well, we're going to strive to have a free-flowing conversation here. I'll just play air traffic controller, but the best way for us to talk Texas football is for me to talk as least as possible and you guys to talk as much as possible. But I will say this, that had it not been for that Rose Bowl game in 2006, of course, that was for the national championship, that kind of puts into the shadows, of course, the game that Matthew refers to the year before. That was an outstanding Rose Bowl game with Michigan leading late and then Vince Young leading the last second drive to win, 37-35 over the Wolverines in that one. Yeah, Texas football. Do you guys feel the ire of the rest of the nation and or the Big 12? Does it feel like you're a target? Like people hate Texas football? Do you feel that at all?
I'll touch on the SEC piece and what it's allowed us to do, and then I'll let Clint talk about the Big 12 and the ramifications there. What we found out was SEC is bigger. It's just bigger. Because the moment we dropped our SEC or Texas to the SEC podcast, you had Georgia fans, you had Tennessee fans, you had Gator fans, you had LSU fans, and of course, Alabama fans on our channel, welcoming us to the SEC. So I've not felt any ire from the SEC part. I think if we come in there and like folks say, if we don't think we're the guy at the table and we just fall in with those other 16 teams and just play football or basketball or baseball, then I felt nothing but welcome, both on our Twitter. We're followed by almost 2,500 Twitter followers. We have social media just about everywhere, and I've never felt the SEC fans not being welcome. Now, Clint can talk about how we feel there is definitely a target in the Big 12.
Yeah, kind of to see that off that, it's crazy because during our lives, we've been doing this for a year. And we do lives kind of like this where people are commenting in, and you've never seen anybody like Baylor or Oklahoma State. Every once in a while we'd get like a Texas A&M, somebody to comment in our lives or someone someone from Oklahoma. But as soon as we did a live, it was crazy how all these fans from these SEC schools joined into our lives. That's what made it seem really bigger to me, is that maybe they're more passionate about football there in the Southeast Conference. And, you're talking about the best, probably an opportunity to go to the best division and the best conference in all of college football. Talk about the Big 12. Absolutely. I think that when you're talking about the ire of the Big 12, you can call them the irate eight or there's a whole bunch of names out there for these 8 teams that are being left behind. But yeah, there's a target on your back each and every week. And I think that Texas has always had a target on the back, and people are going to show up as if Texas is their biggest game. But I think, going into this season, you're talking about going to some of these, locations like, Ames, Iowa. You got to go to Fort Worth. These guys are going to be angry. These fans are going to be angry. And so if Texas and Oklahoma didn't have a a bullseye on their back before this season, which they usually have, it's definitely grown. It has definitely grown.
And just to be clear, guys, I actually asked that question, understanding, of course, what's going on going forward, but that Texas has not been the most liked football program in the Big 12 and across the nation before the SEC expansion situation. So let me hit you up with this as well. The recruiting classes since Mac Brown left, and of course, he again went to the Rose Bowl, the national championship game in 2009. My apologies there. But that was, of course, in the 2009 season. And then he left after 2013. I think that Alamo Bowl game was his last. Charlie Strong recruited top 10 to 5 to 15 classes, as well as Tom Herman. So what didn't go wrong, or what went wrong? What were the failings year after year after year, where really there was only one season borderline expectations were met in that 2018 campaign with a Sugar Bowl win?
So I can tell you, me and Clint are really tied into recruiting. Like we have guys on from 247 Sports who are recruiting analysts. We have, current 22 commits that have come on and done interviews with us this year. And we understand, and a lot of times you got to talk Texas folks into understanding just what you said, Mark. And that's since 2010, you really haven't competed like the likes of Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. So why do you expect to continue to recruit on that level when you haven't developed players? Number one, you haven't competed and won a Big 12 championship. That's number one. Number two is you haven't sent anybody into the draft on day 1 or 2. And so to us, it's always been about. But then if you look, you went from Todd Orlando to Chris Ash to Pete Witkowski. You went from Tim Beck to Mike Yursich to now Kyle Flood. The constant turnover of coaches, the constant turnover of systems. I don't care what kind of 4-star, 5-star recruit you are. If you got to continue to change the way you play year in and year out, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to set yourself up for success. So one is we got to solidify our coaching staff and keep them long enough to where they can put their schemes into fruition, because it's not going to matter. Again, our last 2 top draft picks, Sam Cosme, Joe Osai, and Connor Williams, weren't 5-star recruits. So it's a problem with winning and player development. That's the disconnect that Texas has had over the last 10 years. Clint, you got something to add?
No, you pretty much nailed it. To me, it comes down to development of players. You've had these top classes. If you go back and look at blue chip ratios, there's terms out there, blue chip ratios, how many 4- and 5-star players you have, versus the other other teams that are out there, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, hell, the LSUs, the Clemsons, the list goes on and on and on about these 4- and 5 stars and what the blue chip ratio is. But when you have a team that I think we're currently at like 61%, 5-star and 4 stars this year, if you would have went back and looked last year, with where we thought we were going to come in as a position of strength in the Big 12, you had I think 66% blue chip ratio number, 4s and 5 stars, which was number 5 in the nation. So if you're not developing players, you're recruiting, eventually you can't continue to sell the same bill of goods. And that's what Texas is up against at this particular point. You can't say, okay, hey, come in 5-star. I need you to come to the University of Texas. Now we want to have you help us get the program to the next level. That's what they've been selling year after year after year with each one of these coaching staffs. To me, at this particular point, in order to get those recruiting rankings to where they need to go moving forward, Sark and his staff have to be able to develop the players they currently have on the roster, and that's 4-star, 5-star, and 3-star. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, just to hit on that, I mean, if you look at the weekend preseason games, look at all the Texas players that balled out in the preseason. PJ Locke, I'm a Broncos fan. PJ Locke and Caden Stearns played really well. They're going to make the team, and Caden Stearns probably will start some games if someone gets hurt. Sam Cosme, I think, was the highest graded offensive lineman on Saturday for the preseason. I mean, it's just pathetic at what we've done with development-wise. I mean, these guys clearly have talent because they get undrafted or underdrafted in the NFL, and then they go into ball in the NFL. I mean, Poona Ford's a really good example of that. I just don't understand it. And if Sark can just do that, where he gets these 3 4-star guys to play above and beyond what they're supposed to do, or just where they're supposed to be at, we'll be fine. And I think hopefully he can do that.
And you're on it, dude. Like he treats his player personnel department like the NFL. Again, he's talked about having his recruiting classes like his draft classes, his transfer portal is treating like free agency. But he said that we have to be the number one developmental staff in the country, number one. And number two, we're going to fit our recruiting model to our scheme. We're going to stop just grabbing these great players who are 4 and 5 stars by Rivals, ESPN, and 247. We're going to look with, that's going to tell them where to look, but they're going to look really, really closely and make sure that player, a good example is Champ Lewis, this recent 2022 commit, 6'2", long rangy corner. He's in the top 1,000. He's a 3-star, but when you talk about scheme fit, he's exactly the type of corner that Terry Joseph wants, that Blake Gideon wants in their secondary. And again, he's got to sell that to Pete Kwiatkowski, who's a proven defensive coordinator, who has to sell it to Steve Sarkisian for that kid to get a scholarship offer.
And that's the thing too. For an example for that would be kind of like basketball. I mean, Shaka Smart, I think, got these higher rated guys, but then brought them in and pushed them in a system. I think we were kind of doing that in football as well, where we bring in like these 4 and 5 star guys, but they didn't really fit in our system, and we kind of forced them into our system. Whereas I'd rather have 3-star guys that fit into the system and know what they're doing. That just makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I want to just add to that real quick. So I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, and I was kind of trying to look them up here. Between 2010 and 2019, drafted players between Texas and Washington. And it tells you the difference between, Pete Kwiatkowski and what he's doing with those players at Washington versus what Texas has done, being able to do with, the 4 and 5 star guys they're getting at Texas, which is crazy. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think between 2010 and 2019, University of Washington had 19 drafted players. And I think majority of those guys were 4-star and 3-star players. And I think 1 2-star player. And if you go look at what Texas did in that same time frame, they've had 10 players drafted in the NFL. So I think what you've done is you've got a mixture of good NFL guys that have been at the NFL level, guys that have been in championship programs, but then you get the guys like Choate and Pete Kwiatkowski, and Bo Davis that are going to be able to develop these players to where they need to go. I can tell you that that's probably the most exciting. I think that's what excites me the most, man. Really. About what's going on the 40 acres right now. And it's really not just the football team, but it's the coaching staff that we currently have. And you go back and listen, I think they did a media availability with Kyle Flood, offensive coordinator, offensive line coach today. And they did one with Pete Kwiatkowski. I think that's the first time we've had an opportunity to listen to him today, as soft-spoken as he is. But I'm really excited about where this coaching staff and how they can develop the team moving forward.
There are obviously some other underachieving programs out there in the last decade, USC, Miami, and a few others, Florida State just in the last 3 or 4 years, that are not meeting the recruiting rankings with a record on the field. But Texas has clearly been at the top of that list, unfortunately for you guys, where the 5 and 6 win seasons have come desperately short of the recruiting rankings. The other dynamic with Texas football that I don't hear with any other blue blood or elite program, and some folks will laugh at me when I say elite, but obviously the expectations are elite, the facilities, the money, everything else adds up to elite status, and historically elite, not just playing it right now on the field. But every time there's a coaching vacancy and a coaching search, unlike the other great programs in the country, there is always a conversation regarding the politics in the state of Texas, in the University of Texas, having more impact on that coaching search. You don't hear that when name your job across the country. When those jobs are open that are on the same level as Texas, and those are only another 5 or 6 jobs, you don't hear that as part of the discussion like you do with Texas. Is that a real thing? And what is that all about?
I'll start with this, and I'm gonna go positive before I go negative. And the way I'm gonna go positive is, I think for the last really 10 years, you've had athletic directors who've kind of been in the door and out the door, or been there and they knew they were going to stay there. It was kind of like just a stopping ground. I think currently where you have right now is an administration in the president and President Hartzell. You have Kelvin Ite, who is the y'all gonna have to help me out with his title. Board of Regents, and the director of the Board of Regents, and then you have Chris Del Conte, who is probably one of the best athletic directors in all of college sports. And they're aligned. And I think for a long time you didn't have that alignment when it came to president. And y'all can tell me if I'm wrong, but president, athletic director, and the Board of Regents. I think currently where we're at is a good place. I think everybody's aligned all the way down to a point where, Sarkisian has been able to go out and hire who he wanted to. They've hired, multiple coaches across multiple, look at Chris Beard basketball program. But to me, it was all about alignment. Do the big money donors probably get involved in who's going to be hired at the University of Texas? Absolutely. That's what happens when you got a whole bunch of money and you're going to have a say in who they're going to hire and who they're not going to hire. Has it played a part in probably our previous guys? Absolutely.
Talking Texas football here with Texas Football Talk. Now, how long did you guys have to brainstorm to come up with that name for your YouTube channel? Was that like a long time in the making?
Oh, absolutely not. Like I said, the conversation to have a YouTube channel happened the day before we produced our first, not video. It was definitely an audio podcast that was transmitted over YouTube on a black screen with two cell phones tied together by speakerphone.
That's what I like to hear. Yeah, well, most potential YouTubers are frozen in, what do I say? It's not going to look good. It's not going to sound good or anything like that. I held a iPhone 3 up to my face and just started talking.
So I think the biggest thing, Mark, is when we created this channel, it was more of we look at ourselves as fanatics or fans, just like anybody else. And I think that's what we wanted to keep our channel is really just having conversation. And that's why if you've ever seen one of our lives, you'll see that we try to answer every comment that comes through there, because that's who we wanted to be. We're just guys talking ball. That's exactly who we are. Guys that just want to talk ball with anybody else that wants to talk ball with us. But Sam Kim, the comments you keep putting up there, Mark, about Sam Kim, I think he dislikes University of Texas. I don't know if he thinks that the horns down, is one of these things that hurts our feelings. Actually, to me, it's like a term of endearment. That's the way I kind of look at it. And it's funny how other fans think that really bothers us when in actuality, I think it was big. I think the media makes it bigger than what it actually is. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to be loved or hated. You don't want to be somewhere lukewarm in the middle where nobody cares about you and you're irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark, you asked that question a little bit earlier about bulletin board material or target on our back. Like, we've already created that within the Big 12 and when we moved to the SEC. So yeah, if these kids weren't primed to play TCU in Fort Worth, or weren't primed to play Iowa State, who's returning 20 of 22 starters and they're projected to finish behind, they better be ready. They better be ready to face what somebody you pumped up there just a minute ago, an Oklahoma team that's bringing probably the most talented roster they've brought back since they were competing for national championships. Again, we thought our time was last year when they were breaking in Rattler and we had Elliger, and we felt like we were just as talented as they were. And that's what kind of primed the removal of the previous administration, I believe, was the losses to TCU. You expect to lose to Oklahoma. You win one, lose one. They're just as talented as you are, but it's the TCU losses, the Baylor losses, the Tech losses that really get this fan base fired up, or when you're squandering away a win against Iowa State because you decide to fake punt on your own territory or take points off the board when you have a lead. So, yeah, just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the TCU series, if I'm not mistaken, 2-7 is in my head, right, over the last 9 years.
Right. Yep.
When I get guys like you who obviously know their stuff and combine the knowledge and the passion, you got to bear with me and forgive me, because we'll get to the present and future in just a second. I just have one more historical type question, because I love this kind of stuff. When Tom Herman took the job, I thought he was the right guy. And even up until the last news conference, this guy, number one, we know he knows offensive football. He's got a commanding presence. He's intelligent. To listen to that guy talk ball, he knows what he's talking about. I just thought there were a number of things working for him there. And you look back on it, and you can see, I guess, 2020 being a microcosm of the entire tenure from Tom Herman. He was this close. He was the Iowa State game, the Oklahoma overtime game. I guess he was that close to losing more as well. There were some tight rope acts on the other end that they did pull out. But what went wrong there? Did you guys feel as though he was the right guy to take this and keep it at the level you guys expect?
Could I hit this first?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought right away he was. I'm not gonna lie. When it was between LSU and us, I was like, please pick us, because if he took the LSU job, I didn't know where we were gonna go. I didn't really think of anyone else at the time that could have taken the job. And you're right. When he took over and he came in with the press conference, I'm thinking, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. But then you kind of realize he's like a snake oil salesman. He's a politician. He'll tell you what you want to hear, but I don't think he had the goods to back it up. And the thing is, his original staff was just, they were bad hires. If he would have made the hires that he made on this second portion of his staff originally, I still think he'd be here, because I really like Tim Beck, or not Tim Beck, our defense coordinator from last year.
Mike Yusich and Chris Ash.
Yeah, Chris Ash. Sorry about that. And I would have been fine with retaining him. Obviously, we went a different way with Pete Kwiatkowski. But I just think he just couldn't back up what he was bringing in the press conferences. Obviously, couldn't develop. And overall, it was just kind of went downhill from there. And also, I don't know if he created the whole Urban Meyer situation, but bringing all that heat on him from that, I think really took a toll on him. I think that aged him a lot, because if you saw from then on there, he looked sick in press conferences. Like, he lost a lot of weight. His hair was thinning. He did not look good to me.
Yeah,
okay, so I'm gonna hit on it real quick. So we were on the show with someone else hosting this past week, and they asked us. Clint talked about our excitement level with the coaches and what we think they could bring to the university. Somebody asked us, when was the last time we were as excited as we are right now since the 2005 national championship game? And I said, after the Sugar Bowl win against Georgia. I really, really felt we were on the right track. Like, we played really, really well in that game. Like I said, we had Sam returning that was his sophomore year. His junior year, I felt like we had the talent coming back to really compete for a championship. And it just seemed like it went all downhill. And we're a fan site, but yes, we do have friends that cover the team. And if you talk to them, it's a relationship issue. How Steve Sarkisian's talked about having relationships with his players, relationships with recruits. Tom Herman didn't take phone calls from recruits. That was an assistant coach job. So the whole Quinn Ewers, Tom Herman won't talk to him. That's the reason why he decommitted. That's a fact. And when he would take the podium on Monday, he would never take accountability for his team or take the blame. It was always another problem or this or that, or we got better because we had a good Sunday practice. It was never taking accountability for his team's performance, because Mark's right. You lost 3 games by a total of 13 points, but you could have been 4-6 or 5-5 just as easy. You had to come back from 15 points down to Texas Tech with 3 minutes to play and get an onside kick. Like, those things happen over and over and over again. So you could never blow anybody out or beat anybody by 2 touchdowns that you were supposed to beat. They were always nip and tuck. And then you would lose games. Like I said, we didn't lose a road game last year. We lost 2 home games and a neutral site game to TCU, Iowa State, and Oklahoma. But yeah, I think it was more relationships and accountability than it was about, like Mark said, his genius about offensive football and being able to coach the X's and O's. I think it's more about relationships and how he handled the press. Yeah,
to me, he was one of these guys. Again, would be crazy to sit up here and think that, when Tom Herman wasn't hired from Houston, that wasn't everybody was excited. That's first and foremost. To me, when you play not to lose versus playing to win, you always put yourself behind the chains. And I think that's what you got from Tom Herman each and every weekend. That's why the games were either, that's why they were close every weekend. That's why an individual like me that takes blood pressure medication has to take 2 blood pressure medications, because you knew exactly what you were going to get on Saturday. And I think it's because that's why they had what they nicknamed Turtle Tom, is because he would literally become like slow everything down to a point where you became so conservative that you stopped trying to win, but you played not to lose. And I think that was really the downfall of Tom Herman. And like Jeremy says, you got to be a relationship guy in college football. Some guys can do it. Some guys run off to the NFL because they don't want to have to worry about being that relationship guy. But you got to be able to talk to recruits, be personable to parents, go into a living room and sit down with the parents and know that you're being real and genuine. And I think that was one of his weaknesses. And you've seen it on Mondays during press conferences when he'd come out and talk in a press conference, and he made himself seem a lot smarter than everybody else in the room. And I think that turned a lot of people off. It got to a point where I stopped, I was one of these guys that because we'd do a show on Monday nights after his press conference, and I stopped watching press conferences altogether. It just became the same thing over and over and over again. You kept hearing pretty much year after year after year.
When he got fired, there were talks of players would walk down the hall next to him, and they'd be like second or third string players, and they'd say hi, and he wouldn't even talk to them. So, I mean, you can't do that at all, especially the college kids. In the pros, you can probably get away with that because they make more than you, and they probably don't respect you that much anyways. But college, you got to be like they're pretty much their parent. So I don't understand that. And then on the field is, again, he hit on the biggest issue is there'd be games. I still remember the Texas Tech game from 2-3 years ago when you're up by like 21, and he just goes into a shell, runs it like 6 or 7 straight times, and they end up coming back, and Sam has to pull it out of his butt. And that was the biggest issue is we'd always rely on Sam to pull something out of his butt to win games, and we can never get the team to play as a team. It would be always one aspect was going well, and the other two weren't. Special teams, especially the first 2 years, was terrible. So it's just an all-around mess. I'm glad to be rid of him. And hopefully Sark can improve on the things he wasn't good at.
Folks, you've arrived at the Voice of College Football. We are appreciative to have some Texas football talk here. Featuring Texas football talk. We got Clint, we got Jeremy. Matthew, we appreciate you connecting us and joining for the conversation as well. Leave your comments, your questions, your debate topics there in the live chat. And please hit the like button, share these videos out on social media. Just flat out let people know that they can catch these guys on Texas Football Talk. If you love the Horns, if you love the Big 12, SEC, or if you just follow the big brands and want to hear solid college football talk, please join Jeremy and Clint at Texas Football Talk, and you can subscribe here as well. All right. Is there any concern? Because if I run the numbers through my head in terms of if the product on the field does not improve, you're looking at a team that if you look over the tenures of Charlie Strong and Tom Herman, it almost comes out perfectly to a 7-5 football team every year. You kind of size it all down. Well, you take that team that typically goes 5-4, 6-3 in the Big 12, and is typically got 2 or 3 gimmies a year, and then maybe plays somebody, which would obviously be Oklahoma, that they typically lose to. But as you guys know, you've played Oklahoma despite this down period. Oklahoma tough every year. It's not been a one-score game. It's been years since it was not a close game. So you play Oklahoma tough. There's usually somebody that jumps up. It's almost like every year somebody jumps up in the Big 12. Last year was Iowa State, and they're expected to this year. 2019, it was Baylor. 2018, it was Texas. 2017, TCU. Somebody jumps up to challenge Oklahoma. The point I'm getting at is if you take that versus a schedule that really is layered with teams that are typically top 25 to 40 in the nation. A lot of TCUs and Oklahoma States that are going to be 7-5, 8-4, and you transition that to the SEC. And of course, the fallacy of a lot of SEC people that just want to say we're going to beat your brains out is they list all the best teams in the SEC and say that's who you're going to play every year. Well, that's not who you're going to play every year. You're going to play a good portion of that. You're going to play 2/3 to 3/4 of that. But you're not going to hit all the great teams in the SEC every year. But is there a concern if Sark can't ramp this up, then a lot of those 8-4s and 7-5s become 5-7s most likely?
Can I take this first? So I think I think we need to worry about where we're at right now. Currently, I think we need to work ourselves out of the Big 12 first. To me, that's where that's my focus. We can think around 22 SEC, all these things, but I think what needs to happen is, again, I can tell you, I'm super excited to move into probably the best division and the best conference in football, bar none. I can tell you, most fans of Texas are. And I think what that does is, again, we've had if you look at the last 10 years, you've named TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, Iowa State. Again, if you look at the numbers, nobody's been as talented on paper, to include Oklahoma on paper, as Texas. The problem is we consistently, and I hate to say this because I want to give these guys, the teams that beat us, they beat us on Saturdays. So I'm never going to disparage what they do. But the problem is when you consistently play down to teams, but then you go play a Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, you play Oklahoma, who's currently, consistently ranked in the top 5, or you play Iowa State, who, had a damn good football team last year, and you lost to them by less than a touchdown. It probably could have won. You should have won that game at home. The problem is that you consistently play down to those teams. I think what happens when you go to the SEC, there are no off weeks. Yeah, there are going to be teams like, Vanderbilt. They're going to play teams like, and I don't really want to name a whole bunch of teams in the SEC because I think, again, that's best college conference in college football. So I don't want to name a whole bunch of SEC teams. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, but South Carolina, Vanderbilt, these teams, some of these teams aren't as good as people make them out to be. I think A&M's played Georgia once in the 10 years that they've been in the SEC. So yeah, you're going to play. It depends on what league you get in. You're going to play some damn good football teams, but it's in. You're also going to have the times when you play Division II. FCS football teams like during the middle of your season to give you a break from the SEC grind. But I think what it does is to me, it's gonna create a upward trajectory that Texas has not seen in a long time. And I think it's because you're going to have to go in there and you're going to have to play ball each and every weekend.
I'll make 2 points. Clint didn't mention LSU. If you go back and look at that national championship LSU football team, it's probably the best team since, early 2000, USC's in Texas as far as a complete football team. And we played them pretty doggone tough. And I'm not a Vegas guy, but somebody handed me a stat the other day that said with this current roster, with the ESPN Football Power Index, that Texas would only be not favored against Alabama, 10-point underdog, that's just about everybody in the country. Georgia would be a 2-point underdog, A&M be an underdog, 2-point underdog, and Florida be an underdog. Every other team in the SEC, they'd be favored to beat. So again, every time we've gone up against the SEC, I think we've made a pretty good account for ourselves. Every time we've gone up against a team that's been favored in the top 10, like you said, Mark, we've been able to compete. Nobody's blowing us out. It's those games that against TCU, the Iowa States, the Baylors, and the teams you talked about that got us in this position we're in right now, where we're needing to sell a product to recruits. And again, I think Clint hit the nail on the head. When you're talking about Kyle Flood, you're talking about pro experience. You're talking about Bo Davis, you're talking about pro experience. You're talking about Steve Sarkisian, pro experience. You're talking about national championship quarterbacks, time and time again, or Steve Sarkisian's track record with quarterbacks. You're talking about national championship coaches that are on this staff that know how to develop players because they know what that NFL model looks like. They know what that NFL product looks like. Why? Because they coach there. And they come from Alabama and a hell of a coaching tree with Saban and with Pete Carroll before that. So I think we're in a good spot. We just got to, like Clint said, we got to go into the SEC looking to compete week in and week out and give our best version of ourselves. That's all we can do.
Yeah, I was going to say just play to your standard. If you create a culture and create a winning culture at Texas and you play to that standard, then it doesn't really matter what conference you play in. And I think this is a really important year for Texas because if we do go into the SEC next year, we need to have a good year to show out in the Big 12 and to show out to recruits as well that we can compete in the SEC. So this year's a big year for multiple reasons, and that's definitely one of them.
Do you guys have a preference as to how the SEC is going to be laid out? Pods, divisions?
I'm hoping for divisions. I don't like the pods.
Me too.
So
I think
ahead,
the Western Division. I think the Western Division. We talked about this, and Clint's a pod fan because like he kind of talked about Georgia never playing out A&M, and he wants schedules to be equal. But I like the division. The Western Division being made up of Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, the 2 Mississippi teams, and LSU. And then everybody east of that, the Tennessee schools, the Alabama schools, the Florida schools would all be the 8 that make up the East. I know that there's teams in the West that don't want to get aligned with Alabama, and they're the most outspoken about pods and not being in divisions. But I'm a division fan. I think divide them 8 and 8 and set that boundary in Mississippi and get after it.
I'm going to put it this way, Mark. I'm a pod fan, but I'm also a Texas fan that's currently not in the SEC. So like I tell, everybody on our show, Texas needs to show up as one of 16 teams when they show up to the SEC. Have a seat at the table. We shouldn't have no say-so. That's the way I look at it. So wherever they put us at, they put us in a pod, they put us in a division. It's their conference. we've been welcome to their conference. We're new to their conference, wherever they want to put Texas at. If it's a pod or if it's a division, we're welcome to be. We're excited to be there. But I'm a pod fan, and the reason I'm a pod fan is because it's kind of set up like the NFL. If you're in this pod, you'll play the teams from this pod, and then you play them every third year. So you're not sitting here and the only reason I know this is because I follow A&M, because again, they're to me they're a rivalry, and I got to recruiting is the lifeblood of any program. But to play Georgia like once in 8 years, to me, I'd rather be able to play these teams and help for traveling purposes. Who doesn't want to go to Tuscaloosa? Who doesn't want to go to Gainesville? Who doesn't want to go between the hedges? Who doesn't want to go to these places? And if you're in a division, the chances you go into some of these places are going to be multiple years away.
How does the championship game work in the pod scenario?
So I think they take, and again, I'm not an expert on the pod situation, but there's 4 teams in that pod. And then I think they take the 2 top teams from each pod. They play each other in like a semifinal, and then depending on ranking. And then I think the 2 winners of that play in the SEC championship. So
you'd probably have to get rid of a regular season game then.
Yeah. I think you would have, I think they would 9. I want to think nine SEC games, 9 or 10 SEC games, and you would play 2 non-conference games.
So I'm guessing if they go to the pod system and you've got a playoff within the conference, then you probably do what the Big Ten did this past season and the Pac-12 attempted to do, and that's you slot everybody else in the conference to play that weekend of the championship game so that they can play just as many games as the 2 teams or the 4 teams, whatever it turns out to be, that make the mini playoff within the SEC.
Well, you could, for the SEC, that would make sense as well if you did a 12-team playoff, because the 5th and 6th place teams could potentially be competing for a spot in the 12-team playoff. So that would make sense as well.
True. All right. I posted a video I thought I figured out because I've been trying to make this work for college football across the board, because I think these conference schedules, being in the Big 12, hold on to this one little nugget of greatness from the Big 12. And they didn't figure this out. They're not the genius. They kind of fell into this, is that they've got the truest championship. They've got the purest championship. Everybody plays everyone. That's the way it should be. And guys like me dissect the schedules and say, well, that was unfair, because my most egregious example of unfair scheduling in the SEC was about 7-8 years ago, where, of course, LSU and Alabama, playing in the same division, play exactly the same opponents. They play themselves and the same 5 division opponents. So 6 of the 8 games are exactly the same. Alabama played 2 teams from the Eastern Division that the previous season went 2-14 in the SEC. They played Tennessee and Kentucky. LSU played 2 teams, Georgia and Florida, who went 14-2 the previous year. That to me doesn't make any sense, and it can be fixed. It can be fixed.
And that's why I guess I like the division, because it's balanced on one side or the other. Because if you got 8 teams, you're playing 7 conference games. So that I think that would eliminate some of the ability to do what you're talking about, Mark. But then again, I like Clint's, because in the NFL, they do, you'll play this division. Like if you're in the NFC East, you're a Dallas guy. You're going to play either the NFC South, West, or whatever conference that you're on the same side of. But then you're going to rotate the AFC team conference that you play. And then they use, hey, if Dallas finished 3rd, they're going to play all the 3rd place teams within the conference. So it kind of aligns you for parity, like the NFL tries to do, but at the same time, I do like division, and then not a playoff, but just the West plays the East.
Well, the one thing COVID did was expose how dumb the scheduling for college football was. We've scheduled this 9 years in advance. We can't change it. No, you can change it. You just don't want to change it. So, yeah, I agree. It definitely needs to be changed. And I do like the NFL system where basically if you had a bad year last year, schedule's easier this year. So they could figure out something like that for college football, I wouldn't mind it.
That, Matthew, I understand the logic behind it. So there's some things that you disagree with and you're just like, well, that's just stupid. Yeah. There are other things you disagree with and say, I understand the logic in it. It makes sense. I just don't agree with it. And that's one thing right there. I understand the NFL model of scheduling, and they're trying to create parity. It's just like the draft order. Why should my team draft first just because we're pathetic and incompetent we go 2-14 every year? Why should we draft first? Why should the NFL be giving us a gift? Why not have a random selection of draft picks? So I would say the same for the NFL schedule. I get it. I understand it. It's logical for what they're trying to create, but it's not fair. I'm all for fair and equitable scheduling. That's what I'm for. 288028. He's a faithful viewer, and he's just correcting me that the Big 12 did not fall into that. I will respectfully disagree and say they didn't want to downsize. They didn't want to lose Texas A&M and Colorado and Missouri and so forth. So they got into a favorable position to be able to accomplish that in terms of everyone playing everyone. All right, gentlemen, we appreciate you being here. This has been an amazing discussion concerning Texas football. We got Matthew below me. We got Clint opposite me. And then we've got Jeremy right next to me. And Jeremy and Clint run Texas Football Talk. So I would like everybody, man, if you enjoyed the conversation here, and obviously these guys are bringing it, to head on over there and subscribe to their channel and check out their work. We'll finally get to 2021 here. And it starts with a quarterback competition. And Jeremy, I'll put you on the hot seat first and foremost. Give me a compare and contrast between Hudson Card and a guy that I saw for the first time, Casey Thompson, play with real bullets fired at him, obviously, in that bowl game. And he looked, I know it was only 10 throws, but I was stunned at how good he looked.
All right. So a couple of weeks back, about 6 weeks back, me and Clint did a video. It's called Arms Race, Quarterback Arms Race. And basically what we did was I took Hudson Card and Clint took Casey Thompson. And what we did was I went back because I don't have a whole lot of film on Hudson at the college level. There's a couple of snaps against UTEP last year to go off of, but I watched all his film at Lake Travis that I possibly could. And I looked at their size, speed, dynamics, and then he took Casey and I took Hudson. And what we found was that these guys are pretty comparable. And like you said, Mark, the one thing that separates them is we've seen Casey Thompson throw 6 touchdowns at the collegiate level to 1 interception. I've seen him roll out the pocket under duress and make throws on a dime with movement. I've seen him, hit Kelvontae Dixon in the seam route against Colorado in the Alamo Bowl. I've seen him perform. But so going into fall camp, I think me and Clint were both aligned, although like I said, we picked a side and we talked about their strengths and their weaknesses. And that we both felt like Casey Thompson was going to win this quarterbacking job. The more we get closer to the season and the more you hear from practice reports, and they're actually having an open practice tonight, Texas is, at DKR, where fans can come and hang out and watch them play. But heading into this final scrimmage of the fall and being 14 days out from Louisiana, I really think it's Hudson Card's job at this point. And just from everything I'm hearing, again, we're not media, we're fans, and we do have sources around the team that feed us information. But from all accounts, it looks like it's Hudson Card's job to lose at this point.
Yeah, I think for me, the way I look at it is it's crazy because Texas it's either Team Hudson or Team Casey. That's kind of where we're at this particular point as far as fans go. You know what I'm saying? Like you said, to me, Casey Thompson, Colorado, Alamo Bowl, has the experience. Very little experience, not a lot of experience, but very, very, he has some experience. And what we've seen under the lights in Alamo Bowl was handily probably the best, quarterback situation we'll probably see with, Sam getting injured, because that game was really, really close. And he put some distance between Colorado in that second half. Like Jeremy said, actually, it's funny because I called Jeremy, I don't know if it's last night or the night before, and I kind of went back and I kind of watched the spring game over again, which, spring game doesn't tell you a lot, but it does tell you that one quarterback seems like they are, one, making the throws, two, making the throws before the receivers decide, to come back on a route. And to me, that is clearly Hudson Card. When you look at the spring game, and again, you got Hudson playing against, I think, with the twos against the twos. You had Casey Thompson, and that's one I think we missed, is that I was hoping to see, Hudson Card play with the ones against the ones. So they had equal footing when you're looking at that film. But from all accounts, right now, it's a decision that Steve Sarkisian has got to make. But when it's all said and done and fall camp's over with, as a fan of the University of Texas, you gotta kind of trust what the pick that Sarkisian has based on his track record, him being a quarterback whisperer, him being a quarterback coach, and him, obviously, taking an individual, a 3-star like Mac Jones and making him a first-round talent. You got to trust what whoever Sark picks is the best quarterback moving forward for the University of Texas football program.
Yeah, I thought for the past about 3 months that Hudson was going to win the job, just for the simple fact that you haven't seen any distance. Usually in quarterback competitions, if there's distance, the decision comes immediately. And when the decision doesn't come immediately and it's close, you usually go with the younger guy. And we're this late. We're 3 weeks away basically from playing football. I think Hudson's going to win the job. And I agree with them. I think they're pretty similar. They're both really good athletes. I mean, Hudson was a wide receiver at Westlake High School, had 1,000 yards receiving. Mm-hmm. So he's a really good athlete. I think he's got probably a little bit better arm than Casey, but that's about it. They're pretty similar. And Casey had some fantastic throws in that Colorado game. The one where he sidestepped the defender and threw a sidearm pass over the guy was incredible. I think these two guys are two of the most guys that come to Texas throwing wise in a long time, probably since Gary Gilbert, I guess, out of high school, but he wasn't good at Texas. But out of high school, I'd say him.
Matthew, he played at Lake Travis. You said Westlake, but he played at Lake Travis. But he's a 4-5 guy. You're absolutely right. He's a 4-5 guy. He was a receiver there when Charlie Brewer, now the Utah quarterback that was the Baylor quarterback, was at Lake Travis. But he was a top 50 guy. People forget about that. Like Hudson Card was almost a 5-star prospect who again sat behind Sam Ellinger, who was a 4-year starter. And then talking about Casey coming out of Newcastle, Oklahoma, and that throw you're referencing, him stepping out of the pocket, and hitting Cade Brewer across the middle was on the money, and one of the best throws I saw all last year, because it was on a dime where the receiver. It's not a lot of what we didn't see in Tom Herman's offense. He relied on Sam's running ability and then 50-50 balls to Colin Johnson and tall receivers, whereas when Casey got in there, he was hitting receivers where they still had the ability to move. They weren't jump balls. They like you said, he was able to go through his progressions and hit the guy that was open. Absolutely phenomenal performance against Colorado. But like you, I sense that the closer we get to decision day, that you haven't heard Casey Thompson. And from what we understand, the first scrimmage, you 1 turnover. Some media outlets are saying he had 3 turnovers. Don't know that, wasn't there. But like you said, it seems to be Team Hudson at this point from the media coming out of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys remember any situations where you see a quarterback competition go this late and the young guy doesn't end up winning the job, because usually the starter gets named pretty early if it's the older guy coming out on top. Because, I mean, the comparison I have, it's NFL comparison. It'd be Matt Flynn and Russell Wilson, where they paid him all that money, but you just kept cheering Russell Wilson out of camp, and then boom, he was a starter. That's what that kind of reminds me of. It's like, you hear this, and I just have a feeling it's going to be Hudson.
I think, but going to that, I think I think he came in with a clear mind. I think clear eyes. I think that's the way Sarkisian came in, and I think he again, it's a different scheme that they're dealing with. So if it was an older scheme, the guy's been in there for a while, the quarterback competition. But to me, I think he's given Casey Thompson every opportunity to win the job as the guy that's been in the program the longest. You know what I'm saying? And not making that decision. I think that's where it kind of goes, because I think when you have 2 quarterbacks that are equally as talented and either one of them can win us football games, to me, come in scheme fit, I think Steve Sarkisian is going to wait until the last minute to pick that guy, and I think it's going to be a gut feeling. You just got to hope that the Texas Longhorn fans, man, that are either on Team Hudson or Team Casey can be okay with what Sarkisian picks, who he picks as a quarterback.
Do you think it could be like a Charlie Strong type situation where we see Bouchel just get pushed out there and you're like, oh, this is different? I didn't even know he was going to start that game versus Notre Dame. So
I think he'll have a quarterback pick. I think he said he's going to start working on Lafayette. I think a week and a half out from the end of fall camp. I think we'll have an idea who's running out there with ones who's running the most plays with the ones who the starting quarterbacks is going to be against Lafayette. We'll
definitely know, like you said, they're going to start game planning 10 days out. We're going to know this time next week. Next Wednesday, we'll know who's starting against Louisiana, because you got to start giving them the predominant amount of snaps, because like you said, you're introducing them to a brand new offense. You want to get them as many looks as you possibly can. And Louisiana's a good football team coming in here. So You better pick him and you better have confidence. Like Clint said, you just hope the fan base aligns with whoever that decision's made or that decision is made and who starts. Because Steve Sarkisian said that just this week. This is the toughest quarterback decision. He's had a lot of tough ones since Matt Castle and Matt Leinart. And he picked, like Matthew said, he picked the younger guy and Matt Leinart. And Matt Castle never played it down at USC and still got drafted and had a pretty decent NFL career. So he knows what he's doing.
Hey, with 5 back there, I don't care who starts at quarterback. So.
Amen.
Hand the ball off to number 5. Run, Bijan, run.
There it is. Yeah, Matt Castle, good enough to win 11 games in an NFL season, but couldn't start for USC. Appreciate these guys being here. We got Clint, we got Jeremy, we got Matthew. Clint and Jeremy, you can catch at Texas Football Talk. So please just look it up right here in your search bar, right here on YouTube. Before I let you guys go, I want to go around the horn, and I want to leave it open to anything you want to leave us with concerning this Texas football team. I'll give you a few examples here. If you want to hit us with like your major concerns, maybe under the radar guys that you expect to break out this year, guys that we should be excited to see that maybe your typical college football fan doesn't know anything about, particular storylines or keys to the season, anything that you've got in particular, Matthew?
Yeah, breakout player-wise, Jared Wiley, a guy that Tom Herman just refused to play. I don't know why. I think he's a freak athlete. He's big, he's tall, he's fast. And I believe Sarkisian will utilize the tight ends much better than Tom Herman did. Like Jared Wiley said, I think a couple of days ago, he said, we're not just a check-down option anymore. We're here for big splash plays, and hopefully that's true. And that's probably my biggest breakout player on the offensive side of the ball. I'd say on the defensive side of the ball, Byron Murphy. I mean, from everything I've heard out of camp, that guy's just dominating. He's a grown man. He looks like a grown man. He's huge. And he's a defensive tackle. And we really need – I'm hoping we can get pressure with 3 guys up front this year. Because if we can drop 8, we can get pressure with 3. I think you're going to see a lot of turnovers. We got a lot of explosive athletes. I think we got a lot of or a couple potential first-round picks on defense, including DeMarvion Overshown. I think everyone knows who that is. And I'm just excited for this season.
Sam Kim again. I don't know what that question is. It's a weird question there. Has Sark developed any quarterback prospect to the NFL in his career? If the answer is no, then that prospect ain't good for Texas.
Jake Locker.
Mac Jones.
Yeah, the list goes on and on and on. Okay. All right. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate that wonderful question there. So I'm gonna go. My breakout player is Moro Ojomo. He's probably going to be your starting defensive tackle, probably next to Keandre Coburn, number 98. I've said this, and I'm not going to go away from it. This guy could have been a 5-star if he was 18 years old, coming out in the class that he came out in. He was 247 put out an article when he came out as a recruit that he was the best 17-year-old football player in the country, and he came to the university as a 17-year-old. He is 19-year-old junior at the University of Texas this year. I think he's coming into his own. I think he's matured. Obviously, coming in 17 years old, you still have that maturity that you got to get. He come from a perennial program of Katy High School there in the Houston area. But this guy, you wait for him. Joseph Ossai had just like a rocket launch up draft boards last year. I think you're going to see the same thing from Moro Ojomo on the defensive line this year, which is probably our position of strength if you look at the Texas program. I'm going to tell you, biggest storyline, defensive backs. We have a lot of experience back there. I think we got a lot of good we got a few good players back there. I'm not going to say great right now. They got to play to their potential, but we ranked 108th in the country last year. As far as in the country, I probably stole Jeremy's piece of pie there. 108th in the country. We got get better than 108th, and I think we were 9th in the Big 12. I'm sorry about that, Jeremy. It's up there on my screen here. It's the first thing that popped out.
So these guys gave you breakout players. I was going to give you areas of improvement that we need to maximize what we talked about earlier, and that's our potential. And that's consistency with the wide receiver group. Again, these guys talked about it. Bijan Robinson, he's going to get 20 to 30 carries. He's a Heisman Trophy candidate, Maxwell Award watch guy, Doak Walker Award watch guy, and he's everything that he's cracked up to be. That is our offensive line strength, is the run block game. So that's where we need to get better, is in our pass protection and our consistency with our wide receivers. And again, Clint stole my thunder. Our front seven is solid. These guys talked about Coburn, Ajomo, Jones, and all that they bring. Jeff Choates talked about his linebacker core led by DeMarvin Overshown. We were the 109th worst ranked pass defense in the country. In the Big 12, we had the number 2 rush defense and the number 9 pass defense. That's where we need to improve. We need to improve in our consistency with our wide receiver core, our pass blocking ability with our offensive line, and the coverage skills of our defensive backs. If we can fix those 3 things, I think all the other facets of our team are better than average, above average. So we'll see where we go. But that would be my area of concentration over the last 14 days as we get ready for Louisiana.
Mark, can I look at this comment here, and can I comment on this comment down here? Okay, so I think Thompson, because the O-line is suspect again. I think Casey Thompson's hell of a quarterback. I think he can go in there and do great things as the quarterback at the University of Texas. But you can't take away from Hudson Card being a 4-5 guy, dual threat quarterback, the second ranked dual threat quarterback behind Bryce Young to Alabama, coming out of his class in 2020. It's crazy how people forget these things, right? But at the same time, if you have a bad O-line, you got to make decisions faster. And you got to be able to know that your wide receiver is going to be in a specific spot at the right time. And I think that what I've seen from Hudson Card is that Hudson Card can identify where his wide receivers are going to be at, throw the ball before they actually make their move. And I think that's where the separation is for me right now. I didn't see that from Casey Thompson in the spring game like I did from Hudson Card. But if you think that Hudson Card can't sit back there and be athletic enough to be work around what a bad offensive line, I think we're making a mistake. Yeah,
no,
go ahead.
And I would challenge you to go back and watch his huddle film from Lake Travis. Lake Travis is a formidable 6A program here in the state of Texas. He's playing formidable high school opponents at the highest level, and you watch his speed. He has the ability to tuck the ball in and take off with 4.5 speed. So, yeah, if you think Casey Thompson's mobility is that much better because that's what you're referencing, go back and watch Hudson Card's film from Lake Travis. It'll change your mind.
I can't find the word anticipation, but if you go back, it's all about anticipation. And for some reason that word is, I couldn't think of it the last 2 times I wanted to have the conversation about Hudson Card, but it comes back to him being able to anticipate what those wide receivers are going to do before they do it. That's what it's all about for me.
Well, yeah, just an example in the spring games on that out route, Casey Thompson threw and then got taken for pick 6. He was late on that. Card wasn't late on that the couple times he threw it. And then also, is there a record you guys feel like where we feel like we got the wrong guy? Or is that even possible? Is your like a 6-6 type record? Do you feel like we're going down the wrong track again?
You talking about coach? Or you talking about
coach?
Again, I think that's where we've gotten ourselves in trouble. I don't think 6-6 is like I think the bottom is 8-4. I don't think 6-6 is actually, again, if you're looking at it on paper and you trust that these coaches can develop the way we think they can develop, 6-6 isn't even in my equation. It's not even my thought process.
No, I agree. I think we're going to be somewhere between 8-4 and 10-2, in my opinion. But
that's where me and Clint are. We're 10-2. We think this coaching staff can win the games they're supposed to win, and they're supposed to win every game except Oklahoma and Iowa State. And so you win the games you're supposed to win, and that's probably the ceiling and the floor for me is 10-2, because you can't continue to lose to TCU, Iowa State. But again, if we find ourselves going down that record of 8-4, 7-5, we can't be so quick to throw people out of here. Again, these aren't their players. They didn't get a chance to turn over this roster. They haven't even had one recruiting class. They haven't played one football game yet. So, and that's what we saw with recruiting. Is when you were getting guys that were going to A&M or getting guys that were going to Oklahoma and they weren't choosing Texas, everybody's like, why is that happening? Because you haven't competed at the same level as A&M and Oklahoma and Alabama and Ohio State over the last 10 years. So why would you think that Bryce Anderson's just going to come to your school just because Austin's a great place to live? It's the same thing with the record. Like, you got to be patient with these coaches.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, I think the record is going to affect your recruiting going into not just finishing this class, but going into the next class. So I think you're right, Matthew. I think 8-4 is probably 8-4 is probably where we don't want to be at. I think 10-2 is a possibility somewhere between 8-4 and 10-2. So if Texas finished 9-3 and they beat the teams they were supposed to, and had maybe one loss. I think that's a hell of a season. So
the national pollsters in Vegas seems to think that 8-4 is pretty much the mark. If you look at it that way, number 19 in the country, that's pretty much 8-4 territory. Not that they know what they're talking about necessarily, but Vegas typically hits those numbers fairly well. Don't know what the over-under is there. Is it 8? I think it's dead even on 8. I believe is what Vegas has for an over-under.
A week ago, it was 7.5.
There you go. Texas football talk. There's no way you can get anything misconstrued from that. You head on over there for Texas football talk, and it's excellent as it has been for the last 65 or 70 minutes here at the Voice of College Football. So catch up with Jeremy and Clint at Texas football talk. Matthew, thanks you so much for joining us as well. I got to run, but guys, you are welcome anytime, and continued success on your YouTube channel.
We appreciate it. Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. So want to remind everyone that we got post-game shows coming up here at the Voice of College Football this season. So there's going to be more details on that. Post-game shows at the Voice of College Football. We've got about 10 or 12 lined up. I need to run. We've got a small crowd here anyway, but I need to go. But I appreciate everybody being here. And you know what the deal is. We're going to have college football talk here constantly. I've got to catch up on the predictions. They'll be headed your way. And of course, on Thursday, amendment to the schedule, we've got Buckeye talk at 2 Eastern, and we've got Miami at 7 right here at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you.